All right, I'm gonna call, this is JD Solomon, and I'm gonna call the EMC Steering Committee to order. I think we will still be on schedule, but members, please feel free to eat lunch if you've got it in front of you. General Statute 138A-15 mandates that the chair require as to whether any member knows of any known conflict of interest or appearance of conflict with respect to matters before the commission. If any member knows of a conflict of interest or appearance of a conflict of interest, please say so at this time. Any conflict of interest with the steering committee? Nope. Okay. Hearing none, this meeting is really to give everyone an update of some between meeting stuff that, as we talked about last time, Commissioner Duggan, me, and Commissioner Carter, we're going to work with council to look at some of the issues that we want to change in the bylaws and start to bring that back to the steering committee. After this meeting and some input from you folks, we will move forward. My intention was to have this being able to vote on it maybe in November. I think we're probably going to be looking at November, January for this, just because of the notification and what has to happen. But I also think the main driver behind this is to get the statutory requirements from last year on the election of chair and vice chair straight in the bylaws. And we're good on our time, so we should be good whether we do this in November or January. Any questions or comments on that? So let me start off by giving a little background, and then I might turn it over to council here to give us, to fill in some blanks that I'll probably get wrong. But the first thing we looked at is election of a chair and vice chair, how those terms work, and filling of vacancies. Ellie pulled together, I don't know the exact number, at least a dozen other boards and commissions from around the state that the AG's office works on. We reviewed those, and the long of them, the short of it appears to be that most of them don't try to stagger chair and vice chair. Most of them have an election at a standing business meeting that they declare at some point in the year. And then most of them, if the chair can't do the duty, the vice chair is specifically charged to stand in and fill the gap. So that seems to be a general consensus. Looking at that, what that would really mean is legislation passed in October of last year. We elected me and Chris as chair and vice chair in November. So we would come back at our year after next or next year meeting in the 2-year cycle in November for the election. I also think that works well because with this commission, we're normally appointed in the summer. So that would give us 1 or 2 meetings for new members to at least get to know a few of the commissioners before we had an election in November. So that looks to be the cleanest thing to do. So with that, Ellie, anything you would like to add? You did, we all reviewed them, but you did a very detailed review. So anything you want to add to that?
No, I mean, I'm happy to provide additional background if anyone's interested, but I think Chair Solomon summarized what we discussed and the overarching themes that we saw in the examples provided.
Yeah, Commissioner Duggan.
Sometimes we have circumstances where new members aren't appointed quickly when the other person's term has expired, and we run into delays, and we're not going to have a new member receive adequate time, as you're saying in an ideal world they would. Any thought, have you given any thought to that?
I have, and I guess the first place I would start is the legislation says 2-year terms, and so we're kind of bound to 2-year terms. And that puts us on that November meeting. And most of the other bylaws I saw is whether we vacate out in our terms or not, the vice chair steps up or somebody that the commission names to chair the meeting steps up. As far as the member perspective, we didn't see anything in any of those others that said if full members aren't appointed that will delay the election. Basically, most of them said if there's a quorum present at that meeting, which would be November, we hold an election. Now, if a quorum's not present, right, I think we still have freedom and we can be quiet on that to say that we may have to push it to January. But I didn't see anybody saying we got to have so many meetings before we take a vote on a new chair. And I don't think that'd be consistent with session law either. So does that answer that?
Yes, so the legislative appointees, when their term expires, are they obligated to rotate off immediately, even if there's not a replacement?
No, they serve until they're replaced. I think the hitch in the past has been when there's been a change and we don't have our ethics certificates or the session budget goes into August versus end of June, you know, we have problems there. But most of the legislative appointees are in by September, and a lot of them are in by July anyway.
So will the chair have some discretion, or maybe the steering committee have some discretion? If we find ourselves in a circumstance in November that we don't have a fully staffed new commission, that we would make decisions about whether or not to vote at that point.
I don't see anything that anybody else is doing to allow for a preference there. It's mainly dictated if we have the quorum in November, we vote it. That's what I'm seeing. So we could do something different, but I think would be outside the bounds of probably the normal thing. And again, you know, I'd rather have members seated for a meeting or two at least to get to know each other, and we'd be live to do that. So other questions on chair, vice chair terms? Yes, Commissioner Weiss.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that this needs to be or can be resolved, but I just wondered if you had, in your thinking about the November elections, thought about the interplay between when a regular term expires. If you're appointed in the summer, it could expire. It could be chairman. There's a lag. How that might be handled, and I'll save my other question for later. But just with regard to that aspect.
Yeah, and we did not see anything where people prohibited a member from being elected as chair or vice chair because their term was 6 months or less or a year or less. It pretty much allowed for that member to be duly considered. I do think from a practical standpoint, the commission would look at that and maybe factor that in or could factor it in. But we didn't see any of that in the normal course of business.
It could be challenging to coordinate.
It could be. Now, you remind me of something, Commissioner Reese, that we did see, and we did see this in a couple. I believe the Board of Education may have had this, or the UNC Board of Governors is, and this would be my preference too, that they got specific into who was voted on first, which was vote the chair first and the vice chair second, which I actually prefer that. It'd be whether we want to stipulate that or not. I do think it's important for whoever's chair to be able to stand up and say, you know, this, if I've got to work with somebody closely, that this may be my preference, and that may make a difference on the whole commission versus the other way around. So we did see that in one or two of these.
The UNC Board of Governors has a provision that if a member has served for the maximum number of terms, then they wouldn't be, if their term ended before their chairmanship or their office or position would be up, they aren't eligible to run for that. But it wasn't quite applicable to you all without a statutory number of terms for which you all can serve.
Yeah, and in their case, I think they had you could serve no more than 2 terms as chair, I believe, or something like that, or maybe
4 years in succession.
4 years in succession as chair is their requirement. We don't have that, so I think that's fairly straightforward. And if Ellie can kind of take that and give it back to the full committee, we can look at that and make sure that's consistent with what everybody wants to do. And we can talk about that again and maybe take a vote in committee in November and then move that through. So that's number 1 to keep us moving. Number 2 is in some ways more complicated, in other ways very straightforward. So a month ago, one of the items on the agenda, okay, we're there at virtual meetings, and I thought I might be jumping, was hybrid meetings. It's one of the things we want to talk about, or virtual meetings for committees or whatnot. And we had a case a month ago that was settled in the State Court of Appeals, which basically said unless there's emergency, you can't do virtual or hybrid meetings for the purposes of establishing a quorum. So that's what it said. It was an Anson County case where they tried to kind of shotgun a couple meetings in to fulfill a session of a sheriff, and the sheriff that called the meeting wasn't even there live. And the court said, no way. State law says unless it's a state of emergency and you're then in that area of emergency, hybrid and virtual meetings are no-nos. Have I made that too simple, Counselor? Probably. She can tell you the whole opinion, and I've read the opinion twice.
I won't tell you the whole opinion. I mean, that is the gist of it. There's some reason to think that there's a little bit of wiggle room in that opinion for you all as a state board. But for our purposes, the safest bet is certainly to make sure we always have in-person quorum before any action is taken based on that Anson County case.
Right. Now, I'm not proposing it for bylaws, but we have had a discussion. We do think within the public meeting laws and not taking action, we make it have the committees vote to exchange information and review information, as long as there's not deliberation or action being taken. So that may be an exception for those that would like committees to be able to meet in between or need to get caught up on information. But I do think it's probably dangerous to try to write that in the bylaws with the legal sands changing. But I do think there is a potential way to do that maybe. But again, we got to go with the AG's office on that opinion, I think. And that may be probably situational, not something in permanent bylaws. Anyway, found that very interesting. Any comments? Mr. Duggan, Commissioner Carter, you guys are part of these discussions too and reviews? Okay.
I'll just say that historically, until COVID, members were expected to be present in the building for the meeting.
Right.
Of course, we've had a lot of technology changes as a result of that. It makes it a lot easier to page people in, but I'm not sure I understand that because of one ruling in Anson County that every board and commission in the state has to have people meeting live, because that might be troublesome for some of the other commissions. I don't know, but I do understand the importance of being present.
Right.
I'll just.
You and I agree that we need to be present. I think we're not worried. I hate to say it, I don't want to be too myopic, but I can't worry about the other boards and commissions with our bylaws coming up. They'll have to do what they have to do. And this could change or not change, but for now, for what we're trying to do in the short term, I just don't think we can add that hybrid or virtual option in the bylaws.
Members need to understand that when they accept this assignment, that's part of their job responsibility.
And before COVID, it was just assumed you had to be here, right? And we had attendance
Right.
requirements and all
You were either here or
that.
you weren't. You voted or you weren't here to vote. So I know it's difficult now. People travel a lot more and maintain jobs sometimes other places, work remotely. It's hard. So it's a touchy situation. I am concerned about how it's been handled in the past year, to be honest with you. In some cases, you would let someone in other cases, you wouldn't. That really troubled me. So we do need a clear position on that.
Okay. I think we have it for the bylaws. Other comments? Okay, let me move on to number 3 here. This is not so much something we see in the other bylaws or something we could get. This was just really our discussions around standing committees, where steering committees, civil remission committees fit in. I think the driving force here from a public meeting perspective is we can't have a committee meeting of the whole. So that gives us 7 members that could be part of the steering committee. We have double had it some committees in the past, probably intentionally or unintentionally, to make sure we do that. My recommendation for that, and again, you go wherever you guys want to, but we've got 4 standing committees in the bylaws. And I would start with those four chair people of those committees, the chair and the vice chair, that would be six. That would be the most equitable way to do the steering committee. Now, you can look at the steering committee's charges. It's really, we don't have emergency powers to take action in between meetings per the bylaw. So this steering committee is not taking powers in between commission meetings. It's really to help give kind of policy guidance and administrative guidance over all the committees that are working. And we do have some rules that are more administration of the EMC than they are within our 2L or our 2B or whatever, water quality or air quality rule specific. So that's really the driving force behind this committee. And as most of you know, this committee doesn't meet usually but once or twice a year, and it's related to bylaws or those kind of administrative rules. So my point would be, let's do those six. It's the most equitable way to do it. I know that the MPDS committee is in statute, but I think it has typically a very specific task of almost a backward-looking task of processing the MPDS stuff. I think civil remissions has a very important role, but the bylaws now just say there's one chair, but there's actually two chairs now. And there's no way we can have 4 plus those 3, which gives us 7 plus the chair. Now we have 9 potential people on the steering committee. So
Well,
go ahead. That's,
I disagree.
okay. That's fine. No, I was going to ask for comments.
I think the civil penalties and the MPDS bring unique perspectives to the steering committee decision-making. MPDES, as you know, those committee members have to meet certain qualifications that avoid conflicts of interest with permitting. Civil penalties people bring a perspective of understanding what the public is having to deal with in enforcement cases. And that in turn can affect our rulemaking processes too, I think.
Sure.
So I don't see why 9 out of 15 is unreasonable. But how are you getting to the 6? And be specific about which 4
The
committees
4
you're talking.
standing committees that we have in the bylaws
Mhm.
that all action of the EMC moves through,
Air quality, groundwater, water quality, and water allocation.
those 4.
And you're saying those people
Plus those 2,
their-
chair and vice chair, that makes
No,
6.
I don't see why we need a vice chair. And why can't it be the membership of the steering committee be the chairs of each of those committees?
Oh, that's what I'm saying. It's the 4 chairs of those 4 committees, plus the EMC chair, plus the EMC vice chair.
Oh, I thought you were saying the vice chairs of those
No,
committees.
no, it's those 6. And Marion, I'm very open, Commissioner, I'm very open if you tell me which ones to bump off and let us talk about it.
I don't
I'm
think
telling
we
you the
should
3
bump
I would
in.
bump off just to have 6 and
No,
make it
I don't think
equitable.
we should change this. I think the composition of the steering committee should stay as it is. We don't have any mandate from the legislature to make this change. It's clearly a preference of the chairman, but I disagree. And by making this change, quite honestly, you remove any gubernatorial appointees except for 1 from the steering committee.
Well, now let's talk about that for a second. Let's go through those committees if you want to. We've got 1 chair, and this probably just worked out serendipity. 1 chair is the governor's appointee, 1 chair is a House appointee, 1 chair is a Senate appointee, and 1 chair is an Ag Commissioner appointee. So the 4 state officials that appoint to this commission, each of those has 1 of these 4 chairs. And they're represented. And the chair and vice chair of the commission are elected by the members as a whole. So I don't know how that could be any fairer.
I will point out that at the objection of the executive branch, these changes were made to the appointments. The majority of the EMC was intended to be gubernatorial appointments.
I think what
I don't want to get into all of that.
I don't
Get
either, I don't
debated.
either, but I just want to say that
But
the
I'm saying
courts,
I think we need fair representation.
and I'm saying, and I'm just going down your path. I'm just saying that the 4 committee chairs right now are appointed, and it won't always be that way. It might be mixed either way. But right now, all 4 are by the leading state officials that appoint to this commission. Each are represented on one of these committees. And if you go with the court ruling, and I don't want to get into all that, but the executive branch is the ag secretary and the governor for this purpose, and it's 2 and 2. And then again, I don't want to go into all that, but I don't know how that can be any more even.
I
So we
respectfully
can disagree.
disagree.
I
I
understand.
do not think there should be a change to the composition.
Okay.
And knowing that in all of these cases, it is the chair's discretion, the chair's choice as to who they want to chair each of these committees.
Okay. So let me just get the ramification right, because I'm not disagreeing with you there. If we go with that way and we don't have some double hatting, then it is probable that we will advertise a steering committee meeting as a meeting of the whole, because we will have 9.
No. We have 15 members. There are 9 members on the steering committee presently, right? Currently? 15
No,
EMC members.
Well, there could be. Right now, there's one member by the bylaws that are civil remissions. There's 1 member from MPDS. There's the 4 standing committees, which is 6. There's the chair and the vice chair, which is 8. So automatically, if all those were held by different people, without having the civil remissions person, if just the ones that are specified now, there's 8. We have avoided that in the past by luck or by intention of other chairs to have certain committees double hat it where there's only 7 people at a meeting versus 9. But if all committee chairs are different, there's 9. Unless you keep the civil remission split.
So
Or
the
1.
maximum number of members on the steering committee as it currently stands with
As 8, and it probably should be 9.
9, including the second steering committee.
Yes.
I mean, civil
Civil remissions.
penalties.
That's
Mr.
correct.
Chair.
That's correct.
That's 9 out of 15. That is not the entirety of the commission.
That's the quorum. That's by meeting law, that's a meeting of the whole by Roberts and public meeting laws.
But the business and the charge of the 2 committees, the full EMC versus steering committee, are different.
Let me phrase it. Let me try to go positive with this in the sense of what could be done. We could leave it all unchanged. And in times where we have too many people would either meet as, the steering committee is basically defunct when we have too many people. If we double hat some and have 7, the steering committee can function.
Is there just something I don't understand? Maybe council can explain or how maybe I'm just not understanding what you're saying.
Okay, yeah, I'm
Maybe
probably not saying
get
it
a
right.
second person to describe it.
Yes.
Well, I
Yes.
think what we're looking at is if you have 8 members, 8 or 9, anything above 7, all of a sudden, if the steering committee, if all of those members vote, you have an action of the full commission because you have a quorum of the commission discussing and voting. The problem with that is that you haven't opened it up to the full commission for discussion and vote because you have those members who are not chairs, who are not part of this committee, being allowed to discuss and vote on whatever resolution, whether it's a change in the bylaws or not. So in order to have a discussion group, it needs to be less than a quorum of the members for the steering committee. So the steering committee, just like all the other committees, would present any changes to the bylaws to the full commission, and then the full commission would have a chance to vote and proceed based on what the steering committee has recommended. If we have too many people on the steering committee, then whatever action, especially if the steering committee votes, if all 8 members vote in favor, you have an action of the full commission. Actually, it doesn't matter if you all vote in favor. If you have 8 members and the steering committee votes on something, that's an action of the full body. So what we're trying to do is avoid that, where we have an action of the full body without having the actual full body a part of the discussion.
Is this something in Robert's rules that you're relying on to make this?
That is correct, but I would have to look at state law as well, because that's back in the public meeting laws, I believe, but you would have to clarify that.
Yeah, I mean, I can double check. I'm happy to double check, and I mean, can provide citations too, and
Commissioner Weeks, yes.
I'm just wondering, I'm looking at the current bylaws and, understanding myself for the first time that the steering committee is, composed of all standing committees, which does include NPDES and civil remissions, not just the four committees that meet independently. So just wondering if it seems like there'd be an impact to the bylaws if we change the makeup of the steering committee because of how the standing committees are identified right now. It's that section 3 and section 4 of Article 9.
Yeah, there is a problem with the bylaws for this circumstance.
Okay.
It needs to be corrected, or we could not correct it. We could just let it go and let the chair deal with that by their appointments or just calling a meeting of the whole. That's fine. I'm not here to argue with the EMC as a whole about something that's, the big thing to me is I would be much more concerned if the steering committee had powers in between the commission meetings. But it is just like any other working group that's providing recommendations for the full EMC. It has no power outside the full EMC. So, I don't want to make mountains out of a molehill here, but there is a problem in the bylaws right now with if those were fully staffed by different people, we would have a problem.
Well,
That's all I'm saying.
Can I interject there? I'm not sure I agree with your statement about not having any powers. If you're going to have a majority of the commission sitting as a steering committee and then taking actions, I tend to agree with what council said, and unless you discover something different, I think that's something we do want to avoid. And I guess it's really a question. I don't recall that I've ever seen or remember the steering committee being composed of more than the six you've just described. The four regular committees, I'll call them, that we've considered the standing committees, plus the chair and vice chair. So that you had it's a group of six. And adding, the civil relations folks, I mean, they serve on the other committees anyway, and it might even be some double up there. I'm not sure about that. And NPDS, yeah, it's called out in the statute, but Lord, when's the last time NPDS ever met? Yeah, well, today, but that's my point. Since I've been on this commission, I don't think it's met any other time, or maybe it's once. So I just don't see a need to bulk up the steering committee.
Yeah, I'm not, there's an exception to the standing.
I guess in general, I'd just say I'm in favor of the recommendation you came in with. The 6 members sounds fine. The 4 regular committees plus the chair and vice chair of the commission, and we stay with 6. We avoid the problem of ending up with a majority of the commission in those meetings, and don't have somebody claiming that we violated the public meetings law or something at some point if the steering committee took some action.
I guess you raised a good point that inadvertently, if a chair's not aware of it, we could, or the council's not watching it closely, we could inadvertently have a bad situation happen if we leave it like it is. I hadn't thought of that really. I was trying to clean it up. But.
Yeah,
And when JD, Chairman Solomon says, leave it like it is, actually, right now, NPDES and Civil Remissions Committee are standing committees in the current bylaws. So that's, and like you, Charlie, that was until I looked again, I was assuming the standing committees were the 4 substantive committees. And as JD.
If you will follow back up, Chair Weiss, too, because you need to read down to where it says Civil Remission Committee.
Yes,
And that is singular. It is not divided into 2 subparts. And I don't want to get into that today, but we divided it without ever clarifying that in the bylaws. So what the way this really reads is there's only one person from Civil Remission. That chair is on the steering committee. It doesn't recognize the 2 wings of that committee.
But even if you only picked up 1 and you picked up NPDES, now you're back. Now you got 8. And
Right,
you've got the majority problem.
And that's where I think it stands now to Chair, or to Commissioner Weiss's point, is you have, according to the standing committees, NPDES, air quality, ground quality, water allocation, civil penalties. There's 6 there. Then it also says the steering committee shall be the chair and vice chair. So you have 8 off the bat. So, and I think it's an issue in and of itself, having that potential for a quorum of the full commission being present. I think one way or the other, you got to change it from 8 is what I'm saying. how you get to change it from 8, you just got to get down to 7, because I think you do run into potential issues if the steering committee gets together and starts discussing issues that could be in front of the full commission just by happenstance, or even just being in the same room. We don't want to do that as well, so.
Well, and let me make another point, I guess, which is this, especially if it's less than a quorum anyway, the steering committee's never has and never will, as far as I can tell, be taking any actions. Whatever discussions the steering committee has and comes up with a recommendation, whatever, it's coming to the full commission. So everybody on the commission is going to get their full shot at it, discuss it, vote on it, whatever. So it's really just an advisory body, I guess, in my view, and in a sense. And so it seems to me it's important to avoid the potential problem under the public meetings law and come up with an answer here. And I'm perfectly fine with the 6. I mean, if you want to go to 7, I suppose we could do that, but we need to be less than 8.
Let me keep us moving on time. I'm gonna go to Chair Keen, or Commissioner Keen, Mr. Deerhake, and then we're gonna move on, and we will take additional comments so we can consider this again in November. But we won't decide it today, but the discussion's been helpful. Commissioner
Civil
Keen?
emissions, plural, singular, you add or take away, it's gonna make your 7. Civil emissions, when was it broken down into 2, and how much of an importance will it have to have the civil emissions 1 and 2 both represented? How important is that in reference to the bylaws? If you're gonna plural it out, you got 2. If you do it singular, then you're gonna break it down to 7. You're gonna have under the 15.
No, you
So-
actually have 8. You actually have 8. You'd go to 9 if you broke it into 2, because right now it's not broken into 2.
So you said civil emissions, plural, and she said civil remission.
It's
So I'm just-
singular. It's singular now and gets it to 8. If you went back and made it plural, it would be 9.
Okay.
Well, what it basically says now is you have a
Clarity.
civil risk committee with a chair, and then there's 2 sort of vice chairs or 2 sub-wings of that committee underneath it. We call them chairs, but in the
So do we
bylaws,
work
there's one
into the-
chair.
And my question then, within the importance of the civil remissions, how important is that to be represented on the, how important is that to be represented on the steering committee in relation to your other committees and MPDS and your chair, vice chair? How important is that?
Let me give you both sides. So on one hand, those working committees, and we'll call them working, which are those standing committees, water quality, they're all tied into a set of rules and everything has to go through them to review. So in that sense, civil remissions and MPDS aren't as important as those that have to go in and dive into the rules. On the other hand, outside of the bylaws, those 4 standing committees don't exist. The only 2 committees that exist in the bylaws is a singular civil remissions committee and an MPDS in statutes. So a single civil remissions committee and a singular MPDS are all that exist in statute. So there's your quandary of how we function in our bylaws and what's statutorily required. And you can argue both ways, right? So let's just, Commissioner Deerhake, I'll give you final word, and then we won't make a decision today, but we'll move
I will
on.
say that there is an entire article in the bylaws dedicated to steering committee and remissions. So I think it does justify keeping maybe 1 of 2 steering committee members, and it could be the chair's discretion as to which of the 2 steering committee chairs to keep on there. MPDES, if you want to sacrifice 1, maybe because it is less frequent. If you had to sacrifice 1, I guess it would be MPDES. But I do think because remissions is in the bylaws and a large component of the operation of this committee, that 1 steering committee member should stay on.
That's a very good point, because civil remissions meets almost every time. And that may be a breaking factor. So let us go back and consider and come back in November. Thank you for that. Thank you for all the input, because I think this is important and we're really trying to avoid getting into a trap here. So I got 2 more things that that I just mentioned here on a couple fronts. One is Commissioner Carter has mentioned public information report or request and the bylaws. I've called Commissioner Duggan in about 6 weeks ago to help me with this. Council's been helping me with this. I don't think the bylaws are the place for it, but we're not going to discuss it today. I think you'll hear a report in the attorney's report tomorrow on where we're at. And you guys got Bill Lane's memo yesterday. You saw it as I saw it. I didn't see it ahead of you. So I haven't even read what's in it yet. So I think we're premature with anything to do with that on public records requests in our bylaws. And then the other thing that we can talk about, I really don't know that it is very important, but this thing about Commissioner Carter had mentioned the lawsuits and the power of the chair to last an indefinite period of time. We've had some, in one sense, we let some go with a lawsuit for over a year. In another sense, we didn't even want to give permission to write a letter with the department without everybody seeing it. So I think that's more clarity of how those motions are built, but we can certainly talk about it. I don't think that is required here, but I do know Commissioner Carter is very passionate about this, so we can talk about that in November. And maybe you can have some recommendations, Commissioner Carter. But the big ones for me are the three that are on the agenda that we get worked out. And I think we've been consistent with that. And if we can get those three, my thoughts are, if we can get those three in November, we make the bylaw changes in January, and maybe we live to fight another day on everything else. So questions, comments? Counselor, have I done I know you've worked hard with us on this. Okay. Anybody else?
I have one question real quick. As committee chairs and working with these committees, laying out the ground rules for information items, action items to coincide, or a balance to coincide with the EMC board meetings. That has happened a couple of times with the committees, or the committee that I'm on, is I serve as chair of water quality, is that do we follow the guidelines basically of, are there bylaws that we tie our agenda into to coincide with the EMC agenda in reference to those lanes we get into for the agenda, in reference to action and information and so forth.
Yes.
So tell me how that would work, putting together agendas with the department heads. How does the department heads look at the?
Traditionally, we have tried to follow the EMC agenda framework that's laid out in the bylaws, and that's for the full EMC agenda. And so our committees kind of follow that. With that said, Roberts gives us some flexibility with committees because they recognize, in Roberts, as I think we recognize as the way we do business, is committees are meant to be working committees, so they should have some flexibility. So I don't think, and you don't want to probably hear this, or some of you may like it, some of you may hate it. I don't think we're necessarily bound by the bylaws for the committees to follow the agenda, but I think the expectation we've always had as the way we work is committees kind of follow the EMC agenda. I think there is some flexibility that Roberts gives you as a committee chair to make that a working committee, and you can come up with the format you think works appropriately in certain situations probably. Now, I'll go to council with that because we've not talked about that. I just ran my mouth, so.
I wasn't going to jump in on that at all. I was actually going to come back to Commissioner Deerhake's question,
Okay.
just very briefly.
Yes, go back to that and then we'll come back. Okay.
Commissioner Deerhake, I think it's the definition of an official meeting. This is under General Statute 143-318.10. An official meeting is defined as basically a meeting of the majority of the members of a public body for the purpose of conducting hearings, participating in deliberations, et cetera. So the problem is if you have a majority of the members of the EMC meeting as the steering committee, that is an official meeting of the full EMC under the definition of an official meeting. So any action taken by that group of commissioners is an action of the full EMC, which is why we want to bring it down below a majority and why all of the committees are currently only 7 members as opposed to 8 or more.
I think, thank you, both of you, for pointing this out. And I think the reason we got into this situation is because probably when these bylaws, this particular portion of the bylaw was last adopted, We had 17 members on this commission.
Could be true. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I do think, and I think we agree on this, we have not updated these since I was chair. It's been 5 years, 6 years since we've updated these. It is healthy for this board to look at the bylaws every probably 3 to 5 years for any kind of legislative or board makeup things probably. So I'm glad we're doing it now. And we'll do the minimum we have to right now to get through this. Is that good? Mr. King? Duggan? Okay.
I think it did.
Any other,
At least 17. I thought it was good.
any other comments? Peanut gallery? Okay, they're going to go to lunch now, so we're adjourned from the steering committee. We will meet on schedule in about 30 minutes for the
With that list.
MPDS committee.
Thank you.